Right. And they're full of no, I can jump really great. Because you should have this. This study had in the US history. There once was a land called Palestine where Christians, Muslims, Jews lived fine in the 1800s. It was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. Meanwhile, a bearded guy founded Zionism for Jews to aspire, a land that becomes their home and safe only for their kind. Then there was World War I that ended when the Allies won and England was like, hey, this beautiful land is totally mine. Still, the name was Palestine, even though it was colonized, and a promise for a Zionist state was made by a man that had no right. Then more and more Jews arrived seeking refuge, and that's all right until their plan to steal the land was no longer to hide. The year was 1948 when Israel bullied its way into a state, and thousands of Palestinians fled their homes just to survive. No right to return, no right for a home, no right to fight for the land they owned. Israel expanded more and more into an apartheid. Where is your humanity? Where is your respect for dignity? Call it conflict, that's insanity. It's time to change your mind. One day Palestine will be free, so be on the right side of history. You're not anti-Semitic if you stand against war crimes. Don't be brainwashed by the news now. You can see for yourself the truth. Learn about the story of Palestine. That is an adaptation of a sea shanty by an Egyptian woman knows herself as an influencer and a content creator. Her name is Iman Askar, and she's about 25 years old. And I've loved that song ever since I heard it. And it's a great way to welcome you to Community Church. My name is Dean Stevens. I call myself Irev, Dean Stevens, and I'm the fake minister here. And we have a 105-year history of doing good trouble in the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts and the country of the United States and the planet Earth. We are just really proud of the presentations we're able to give. Tomorrow, I want to tell you that our speaker is not Charles Coe. He's still recuperating for a surgery. He's a wonderful African-American poet and poet from here. But he will be February 15th. Instead, tomorrow, surprise, we have Professor Aviva Chomsky, who will be speaking on Venezuela, the new gunboat diplomacy. So that's just a start. The next Sunday is a program that's called Divine Intervention. Brendan Hughes is a podcaster and filmmaker who put together a presentation about his parents. His father was a priest at Paulist Center. I don't know if you know about this, but it was a hotbed of radical activity against the Vietnam War in the late 60s. And this is a story of his father, who is a father, then a Catholic father, and his mother who got him to leave the priesthood so they couldn't get married and have him, and he could tell this story. It's going to be a wonderful reunion of some of these people from that place. I have a lot of other things going on, but I will not bother you with them or elucidate you with them. But what I'll tell you is one more thing is Ilan Pape will be with us the first Sunday in January. Many other things. Come back to Community Church. We have lots of events happen here. We have a bunch of refreshments, thanks to the Gralta Foundation, for you afterwards. And And what else do I have to tell you? Just that we're so glad and honored that you're here. We had a little reception before, and it was just a wonderful the depth of committed activists for Palestine who are here in this room is just a wonderful thing to see. So thank you all for being here. I want to ask Steve Lowe from the Gralta Foundation to come up and introduce our speaker and concert violinist. You didn't bring your violin, Tom. Next time, will you promise?
Or your song.
Yeah. Steve.
Move this down. Excuse me. Well, I'm Steve Lowe from the Gralta Foundation, and I really want to thank Dean Stevens and the Community Church for hosting this event today. It's really wonderful to have a resource like this in Boston, where really in almost a moment's notice, we can call and say, hey, there's something we never planned that's coming up. Could we plan it now? And Dean is always there to say, yes, we can. So it's really great and a pleasure to be here. We've enjoyed many events in the past, and we look forward to many more in the future. Dean asked me to introduce Tom. Tom and I are old friends, I'd say about 20 minutes old or maybe an hour old. I had not met Thomas Suarez before, but I can tell you that he is a historian, an author, and as Dean just said, a violinist. He has done, in addition to his writing, he's a historical researcher and a composer. He just does everything. Tom writes and speaks frequently on Palestine and has written multiple books on the subject, including one that's called Palestine Hijacked and also a book called The State of Terror. His notable accomplishments, he's the author of those and other books that challenge the mainstream narrative of Zionism. And his work has been praised by figures like Elon Popek, Noam Chomsky. So with that, I will just turn the meeting over to Thomas and we'll listen to this talk about his new book. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by saying that for me, this is more than the usual honor because the combined expertise and experience and positions of all of you here will be a great benefit to me because I need your feedback. For 8 decades, articulate voices, which includes all of us here, have been exposing and documenting Israel's crimes committed right in front of the whole world, yet nothing has stopped or even moderated the horror. And at the moment, things seem more dire than ever. My premise is that we have never fully identified what it is we are fighting. Now, I'm fairly confident that I'm correct in that point, that there is something more going on that we need to be aware of. I will explain my theory on what is at least part of that. And so I'd like to begin by asking you to consider a hypothetical 2-part question about the Israeli state. The question
You want to listen to this? This is
of my subject, geography, not as a map.
It's this thing at the community church in Boston. It's a talk. You go get the pop out tonight.
I need to ask everybody on the Zoom to please mute.
Oh,
Thank you.
The question comes to the core of our subject, geography, not as etched on the map, but as etched in our cultural hardwiring. Let's say, the question part 1, let's say that in the 3 decades leading up to the establishment of the Israeli state in 1948, the name for the proposed state had not been Israel, nor any other biblical nomenclature. Let's say that the state was being championed under some normal, ordinary name like New Poland or Mediterranea or Levantia after the Levant. And in fact, let's use that, Levantia. Here's my question. Part 1, would the state ever have come to be? Now, let's say your answer, unlike mine, is yes, the state would have come to be in 1948 under this nondescript name, rather than that realm seemingly created by God in the Old Testament, and of which the state seated at the UN claims to be one and the same, a claim which the fiber of our society tacitly or actively accepts. If your answer is yes, then the second part of the question is, would the 8-decade history of this new state of, let's say, Levantia, have been roughly the same as it has been under the name Israel? If you think so, then let's see how that would work. We turn on the US corporate news, and this is what we hear. And in the Middle East today, Levantian settlers set fire to more Palestinian cars, homes, and olive trees as the Levantian Defense Forces continued its carpet bombing and forced starvation of the people it keeps captive in Gaza. In Washington, Congress approved an additional $500 million for Levantia as university presidents were grilled for failing to stop campus speech critical of Levantia, which has been declared hate speech by the US State Department, and for which senators warned, God will curse us, which of course is correct. I mean that senators did warn that. The Supreme Court has upheld pro-Levantia loyalty oaths for US citizens who wish to apply for federal contracts, and another university professor has been dismissed after it was revealed that she liked a social media post calling Levantia an apartheid state. Finally, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib was censured for suggesting that Levantia exerts undue political pressure on the US, commentators across the spectrum declaring zero tolerance for such anti-Semitic tropes. Well, I think I've demonstrated my point. We remove this exalted geographic name, Israel, that we are hardwired to venerate, return it to the Bible, respectfully close the cover, and instantly our identical behavior is rank dystopian comedy. In the backdrop to this 15th century Ptolemaic map of the world, I'll sign right there. Let's take a look at how we of our era understand human geography on it. Leaving aside Antarctica as an unnecessary complication to our subject, we take it as the natural state of human existence, that all land on the entire planet is divided up into a series of what I look as clubs. We call these clubs nations, nation states, or countries. These clubs are defined by precise borders that abut each other. So, excepting special cases, there is no land on the planet that is not claimed as part of a club's premises. And in contrast to earlier human thought, in which rulers exerted irregular, diminishing control from a center of power, all the land in any given club is equally part of that club's premises. Finally, all people are identified primarily by their club affiliation. Their club name is their default identifier. Their personhood, their humanity is not intrinsic, but is subject to which club they belong to. Pity those who were born without any club membership. Now, these clubs behave as though they are acts of nature, not to be questioned. But how does a club come to be? How do we know a club is real? Well, it's essentially a pyramid scheme. If enough of the most powerful other clubs agree that a club is real, then it's real. When the inertia of powerful clubs decide otherwise, a club ceases to exist and is replaced by a new club. Apartheid South Africa is an example. Nazi Germany is an example. And once the nation state became the universal norm at the turn of the 20th century, there arose the need for an umbrella organization through which the powerful nations can manage them. First, it was the League of Nations, now the United Nations. The UN tries to manage anomalies and disputes, all predicated on the presumption that the nation state is the natural organizational model of our species. The nation state evolved as political structures assuming sovereignty over a particular existing population, notwithstanding that colonial powers also carved up land to their own convenience, especially in Africa. There is only one case on the entire planet that is a complete disconnect from the presumption that the state is formed around a population. This is the region between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, historic Palestine, the entirety of which is now under the direct or de facto control of the Israeli state. The Israeli state exists in its own dimension on the earth and in our psyche. First, unlike other nations that dispute borders, Israel has simply refused ever to declare any. Its frontiers are and always have been open-ended. Second, as a country invented after the establishment of the UN, it was granted club status, nationhood, solely on the condition that it honor specific obligations, all of which it has instead further violated, yet its clubhood is not questioned. But the third aberration is key. States are frameworks that manage the population group of a particular land, for better or worse. So, various peoples lived on the Italian peninsula, very loosely related culturally and linguistically, and in the 19th century, control over the entire peninsula was consolidated into the modern state of Italy. The state was created around the people of the land. Israel is the opposite. In the case of Israel, the population was created around the state. The land's actual people, excepting one small ethnically defined subgroup that the state deemed ethnically correct, were specifically excluded from the state, either through outright expulsion or slower motion through the denial of personhood. And with the word personhood, we come to a key flaw in our geographic hardwiring that the Israeli state has exploited to its full horror. In principle, no one needs the permission of others to exist. But in today's nation-state construct, personhood is defined by, subject to, their club membership, their nation-state identity. And so the ethnic cleansing and the genocide of the Palestinians is self-justifying catch-22 macabre irony. It is the very fact of the statelessness forced upon them that they have no power to address the crimes against them. Israel, according to its own self-definition, exists only by keeping millions of human beings in internment camps, what we wrongly call refugee camps, in perpetuity or otherwise disappeared because for the very reason that they are the people of the land. If the people of the land were simply to be present on the land as equals, the state would instantly cease to exist. So, the obvious question, how can it be that we, the self-proclaimed torchbearers of enlightened values, not only accept such an anti-state, but maniacally enslave ourselves to it, even as it destroys us? Now, okay, we understand that nation states are amoral beasts that plod along to their own inertia and the convenience of their rulers of the moment. In principle, we're not surprised by the hypocrisy of nation states. And we understand not just the day-to-day propaganda of the corporate media that keep us pacified, but also the deliberate memory vacuum imposed on us, ensuring that we are forever the blameless good guys. So, after World War II, just as one example, we destroyed Iran's progressive secular democracy, resulting in the decades of murderous repression that we now cite to starve and bomb the country. We destroyed progressive democratic Chile and forced a murderous dictatorship in its place. And on, the list is long and grisly. But we can explain these crimes, our government's criminal motivation, just as we understand that the mugger stabbed his victim to steal her purse, but not Palestine. In my view, the cynical business as usual of nation states does not explain the West's support for Israel. There are, of course, common explanations for this. There's in no order, there's the arms trade, there's the strategic advantages of a pied a terre in the Middle East, there's AIPAC buying the US government, there's the Christian Zionists, there's the weaponization of the smear of anti Semitism, and there's the embedding of Israeli business and strategic interests in Western domestic interests, and there's Jeffrey Epstein. There, I'm sure there is. There's also the contrary view that it is the US running the show with Israel doing our bidding, and a blending of all the above. There's even the claim that Israel holds us hostage using its nuclear arsenal as a threat. Now, let's say that all this is true. All the above are true. Add them up, and in my view, you fall far short of explaining what is happening. You add them all up, and the sum does nothing to explain the deranged fanaticism of our slobbering devotion to Israel, that we are willing not just to abandon any remaining pretense of moral integrity, but to repress our own citizens and destroy ourselves strategically, economically, politically, and morally, committing suicide in order to safeguard this state that is the antithesis of everything good we claim to believe in. No, what we actually face is something beyond this, something that we don't see because we ourselves are lost in it. We, not Israel, we have morphed the very idea of Israel, this geographic name, into a cult. And in my view, that's the only accurate word, a cult. And we have embraced this cult such that it cannot be readily isolated from society or pointed to as a particular thing, as would be simple if one were outside the cult compound looking in. It has engendered a mutually reinforcing collective insanity that will destroy us unless we expose it and extricate ourselves from it. Don't blame Israel. Israel cannot force us to be seduced by this cult. We have done this to ourselves and its victims. If we are to understand how to expose and liberate the cult, we need to start with its origin, Zionism, which is a Christian disease, the epitome of Christian anti-Jewish racism. The so-called Jewish Zionism that created the Israeli state is the result of this perversion of Christianity that took root 400 years ago. We collectively, the so-called West and the Israeli state, are now locked in a self-reinforcing societal mental illness. And to be sure, I am not referring to today's organized Christian Zionist movement. That's simply one of the visible manifestations of the disease, along with the others that we tallied up in our plus column. Centuries of Christian apocalyptic theology begging for the Jews to, quote unquote, return to Palestine, created and then fused with Zionism as we know it. The result is mass societal psychosis that self-perpetuates. We are blind to it precisely because we are in effect in the cult compound, or as the expression has it, we are unable to see the forest for the trees. So, if I'm right, the question becomes, what is the medium through which this schism with reality exerts its power? The overwhelming evidence points to the manipulation of ethno-geographic thought. And so let's look at a few examples of the early mapping of the region, beginning pre-Zionism, in fact, pre-Christianity, with the understanding that the earliest surviving cartographic record of any place or by any people is simply that, a tiny piece that simply happened to survive from a vast puzzle. In medieval times, the societies involved with the mapping of Palestine were obviously those with a strong Mediterranean presence. Traditionally, academia has, in broad terms, divided these between what it labels European and Islamic mapmaking. But this is both inconsistent, one by continent, one by religion, and it's also wrong. So-called European mapmaking of the time typically had to do with Christianity, whereas so-called Islamic mapmaking rarely had to do with Islam. And some Islamic geographers, including the most famous, Al-Idrisi, were European. What did bind the two traditions was language, Latin and Arabic. The history of Arabic map making is extraordinary, but played no role in the otherworlding of Palestine. And so, for the purposes of our subject, the few maps we'll look at are all Latin, Western. For the earliest surviving detailed cartographic glimpse of Palestine, pre-Christian in content, will go to the Romans, a roadmap of the world as they had traveled it, dating from about 350 AD, the original lost, but handed down to us via a medieval copy of about 1200. This is the so-called Pudinger map, which is a meaningless name. It's just the name of an early owner. But in order to understand what we're looking at, let's first go to a Greco-Roman map of the entire hemisphere attributed to the Roman author Macrobius. And I don't know if I should stay by the microphone. North is at the top. The lower half is the Antipodes, a hypothesized southern continent to balance the known land on the north. In the center is an equatorial ocean that was believed to be impassable due to its heat. And above it is an extremely truncated Africa. And above that, the Mediterranean and Europe. Here is the same map in which I have marked the Roman world covered in the Pudinger map. Now, here's the trick. What I've marked off, which is this truncated Africa, Mediterranean, and Southern Europe, and in the Middle East, in fact, all the way to Asia and Sri Lanka, take it with your hands and stretch the whole thing as far as you can without enlarging it top to bottom, north, south, and you end up with that. This is the Pudinger map, which has actually been cut into many sections in the interest of preservation, but here I've stitched them all together. The leftmost section is missing. It probably showed more of the British Isles and Northwest Africa. But it extends all the way from the beginning of the British Isles all the way to India and Sri Lanka on the extreme right. Now, it's nominally oriented to the north, but the strip map format required extraordinary indulgences with both orientation and scale. Now look at the bottom, about 3/4 of the way to the right, and I've marked a white box. Does everybody see the white box? Here. That's Palestine. Here is the area. This is Palestine close up now. The throned figure on the extreme left is Constantinople, and the throned figure on the extreme right is Antioch. Now, in 1598, the prolific Flemish mapmaker Abraham Ortelius made a copper engraved copy of the map, which is not only easier to read, but has also preserved where the original has further decayed. And this is Palestine from the Ortelius engraving. And here with major places marked. This is just to give you a taste. In the interest of time, I'll push on, but this will give you the idea. And just to, so you see. We'll now head to the Byzantines and our first real contact with today's politics. Some of you may recognize this. This is the inside of the Church of St. George in Madaba, Jordan, construction of which began in the 1890s over the remains of a Byzantine church. In clearing away the Byzantine church, the remains of its original floor were unearthed. It was a huge mosaic map of the Levant, roughly 1/3 of it surviving the centuries. The map testifies to a rich early cartographic tradition in the area, otherwise lost to posterity. Obviously, a map like this did not come out of a vacuum. Now, for years, I have lamented the fact that despite this map's fame, there was no good photograph of it, no photograph of the entire surviving map from above and uncluttered by the church furniture. By extraordinary good luck, I still can't believe how lucky I was. Early this year, the church was under renovation. And two friends of mine in Jordan went to the church on my behalf. They hoisted a camera up above and took this extraordinary photograph, the only photograph in existence of the entire surviving map, uncluttered by the church furniture, rugs, barriers, tourist ropes, and the ghastly linoleum floor. And it's the first time that we see the fragments of Lebanon in the north here that had been covered up. Now, here I've marked major places. Madaba would have been about here where the map exists, where it was made. And look to the extreme right. You'll see I've marked the Nile Delta and I've marked Gaza. Everyone see that? Here's Gaza close up, revealing that it was quite an elegant city with a colonnaded avenue and an amphitheater. Now, I mentioned that this map has a connection to today's politics. As everyone here knows, Israel occupies and claims to have annexed East Jerusalem, ignoring a half century of binding Security Council resolutions. Well, an Israeli state archaeologist realized that the Madaba map could be exploited to spin the illegal excavations under East Jerusalem, which jeopardized the integrity of structures inconvenient to its narrative. He announced that the reason they were digging, this was the reason, was because the Madaba map in Jerusalem showed two columns. And obviously, as archaeologists, they had to discover the identity of these two columns. And that is the public reason for their excavations. So the news story claimed from archaeological crimes to an uplifting story of archaeologists following enigmatic clues on an ancient map. Now, let's deep dive into Christian civilization, beginning with the formative belief that Palestine lay at the center of the earth, a centrality that goes beyond the purely geographic. A key cartographic inheritance of Christian Europe from Greco-Roman civilization was the idea of representing the earth as a circle with the three continents marked by way of a T shape, what has become commonly known as a TO map. And here from a 9th century manuscript is a TO map in its pure form, with only the continents marked. East is at the top. The horizontal of the T divides the hemispheres into two equal parts, east-west, and the vertical of the T divides the western half, the lower half, into two equal parts, north-south. The upper half is Asia, the lower left is Europe, the lower right, Africa. Again, Asia, Europe, Africa. North is this way. The vertical of the T represents the Mediterranean, and the horizontal of the T represents the Nile to the right and waterways north to the left. The O itself is the Earth's encircling ocean sea. Now, here's the extraordinary part for our topic. Since both the lines of the T, both the vertical and the horizontal of the T, are centered, where they meet is the precise center of the circle, that is, the precise center of the earth, literally for those who envisioned a flat earth, and philosophically, conceptually, for those who assumed the earth was spherical. And where is that? It's the eastern Mediterranean shore, Palestine. This is a remarkable happenstance of history. The map was not conceived to achieve this, but under the quills of Latin mapmakers, that became its destiny. I love this map. This is circa 800. This is a TO map in a Latin manuscript in southern Spain. The entire manuscript is written in Latin, but in which some Arabic scholar got hold of this and said, "What's all these empty spaces about? Let's make some sense out of this." So he filled in all the place names, and I've had all that are legible. I've had them translated. Here, the map assumes Judeo-Christian identity with the names of the progenitors of post-deluge humanity marked in their respective continents. This is a woodblock from 1472, quite late, but I used it for clarity. It's typical of earlier manuscripts. And here, a woodblock from 1484, but again, typical of earlier thought. Palestine has won its own sovereign turf, with Jerusalem at the precise center of the world. Now, this example demonstrates that Palestine's centrality was the guiding concern. We can see this because the Palestine was not carved out of the existing T. Instead, the horizontal of the T was raised, pushed to the east in order to place Palestine at the center. The TO pattern became the skeleton for elaborate medieval mappamundi, which fill in the empty spaces with regions and myths. This 1475 woodcut mappamundi demonstrates the popularity of the idea even at the dawn of the Renaissance, but this is where it ended. I use this example because it's much easier to see small than the magnificent mappamundi such as in the Hereford Cathedral. And if you look at the center, this is the area of Palestine. Now close up. We see, if you start from the lower right, you can see Palestine, Judea, Syria, Samaria, Galilee, and at the top center, Kingdom of Prester John, a medieval myth that encouraged the Crusades. And on the top right, Arbor Solis, the Tree of the Sun from the Alexandrian Romance. The TO motif's evolution into elaborate mappamundi is only half its story. In a parallel evolution found in pilgrimage guides inspired by the Crusades, the motif simultaneously morphed into a Jerusalem-centric map of Palestine itself. To me, this evolution is fascinating. Here is an example from the first decade of the 12th century, and here it is with key features marked and on which I've highlighted the T in yellow. As can be seen, both the T and the O of the TO skeleton have taken on new roles. The right half of the horizontal line of the T, which was formerly the Nile, is now the way to Zion Gate, while the left half, which was formerly Waterways North, is now the way to St. Stephen's Gate. The vertical line of the T, formerly the Mediterranean, now extends above the horizontal line. Below the horizontal line, it is now a pilgrim's road instead of the Mediterranean, and the two pillars at its base are David's Gate instead of the Pillars of Hercules. The new extension above the horizontal is the path to Lord's Temple, and that vertical extension is the most fascinating evolution of all. That path to the Lord's Temple, poetically and graphically, accords the T the ultimate Christian symbolism. It extends just the right amount above the horizontal to transform the T itself into a Christian cross, superimposed over the whole. The symbolism, found also on some mappamundi, was an effective and efficient use of Christian iconography. The final piece of the transformation of the TO is the O itself, the Earth's encircling ocean on the motif's former life. It is now the massive encircling stone wall of the city, and beyond it, other places in Palestine branch out in the periphery far out of scale. For European Christians, travel to Palestine had become a popular rite for those with the ability and means to do so. This mid 13th century map of Palestine by the Benedictine monk Matthew Paris is actually the end of an itinerary map, a series of strip maps that takes the viewer to Palestine from London. Here we have the first Crusades inspired map by a chronicler who believed that the end of time was imminent. Literally, he thought he might live to witness the end of time. Yet, and to me this is worth noting, the map is not devoted to messianic iconography. This is not Proto-Zionism. Over the next 2 centuries, the Latin image of the world and of the Mediterranean region advanced with the synthesis of exploration, trade, the advent of portolan charts, borrowing from advanced Arabic maps, and the translation into Latin of Ptolemy's Geography and Almagest, which were 2nd century texts, but that proved revolutionary in 15th century Europe. I should explain briefly. This is a very large Acre, large because he had a lot of material to put there. That was the major European base. And you see Jerusalem, Bethlehem there, the Jordan River. In the mid 15th century, the world changed. A series of radical European exploratory voyages beginning in the mid 15th century to the south and east circumnavigating Africa, and to the west stumbling into the Americas, caused an equally radical shift in Europeans' understanding of the earth, such that a typical conception of the earth in the early years of the 1500s, even before the first circumnavigation of the globe, was this. With Palestine here. Palestine, South America, bit of North America, Japan. Suddenly, Palestine was one tiny speck on a dramatically enlarged image of the earth. This opened a possible future in which Palestine's special place in the European subconscious would mature to positive cultural nostalgia. But that was not to be. Europe's dramatically widened worldview at the dawn of the 16th century coincided with 2 other revolutions. One was a schism in Christianity, resulting in Protestantism, Lutheranism, the Reformation, a movement that, whatever its virtues, would take us to where we are today. It became the root of Zionism. The other was the printing press. Coupled with the wide availability of rag-based paper, which was vastly cheaper than vellum, maps could now be mass-produced by woodcut or copper engraving, dramatically increasing the ability of maps to inform and influence the general public, a new tool that the Protestant movement would enlist. These Holy Land-themed maps churned out in quantity by European publishers from the late 15th through to the end of the 18th centuries, the physical maps themselves continue to serve Zionism today in one way that is poorly acknowledged, if at all, but which I have witnessed repeatedly firsthand over the years. To explain, many, such as this 1590 copper engraving by Ortelius illustrating the travels of Abraham, were printed in sufficient quantity that enough survived for them to be objects to be collected today. The very act of ownership of these 300, 400, 500-year-old biblically oriented maps reinforces the collector's emotional investment in the Israeli state as the actual place in these maps. Mental gymnastics that Israel encourages, and for those without disposable income, reproductions on calendars or other merchandising suffice. During the 3 centuries from 1500 to 1800, in the Western psyche, mapping became a race for the proto-scientifically absolute best, the latest, the most accurate, the most complete, except for Palestine. For European geographers, Palestine remained frozen in its own dimension. its own time warp. Yes, map makers advertised their improvements and their new this and that to their maps of Palestine, but the framework, that is, what it was they were trying to improve, was always biblically rooted. It was during these 3 centuries that Protestantism gave rise to the image of Palestine as the land to which, quote unquote, the Jews had to, quote unquote, return to prepare for the second coming of Christ. This obsession took root in earnest at the turn of the 17th century, and already by 1648, a petition was circulated to get England and the Netherlands to gather up all the Jews and ship them to Palestine in preparation for the big day. Now, in medieval Christianity, there was, for example, the trope of the wandering Jew who would walk the earth until Christ's return, a libel with which Matthew Paris, for example, was well familiar. But this was not proto-Zionism. Finally, the clock strikes the year 1800, and almost as if the number itself had some magic effect, the conviction that the Jews had to return to Palestine in preparation for Christ's appearance became all the rage. Cataclysmic world events such as the French Revolution were interpreted as proof that the end of time was near and Christ would soon return. In conjunction with that, the imperial motivation of countries such as, but not limited to, Britain and the United States looked to Palestine for new glory and riches, especially as the Ottoman Empire, which had occupied Palestine since 1516, was looking vulnerable. And so both the US and especially Britain undertook large-scale scientific surveys of Palestine, and at this point I will call them scientific, surveys whose official stated purpose was in part to prepare for Christ's return. The most remarkable of these was Britain's Palestine Exploration Fund. Detailed surveys of all parts of Palestine, which, despite their scientific premise, were, again, always guided by biblical nomenclature, the return of Christ, and the return of the Jews as a necessary prequel to that. As these surveys were carried out, evangelist groups moved to Palestine to be there on the scene when Christ arrived. The most famous of these being the American colony established by Anna and Horatio Gates Spafford. This map is Spafford's manuscript, his working draft of Jerusalem as he envisioned it would be after Christ's return. And I'm sure probably all of you know the American Colony Hotel. Yes, that American colony. Yes, there were, he quotes from various biblical passages to say that it's hard to read. I have it notated in my book, but where the tomb of the judges and the extremes of the city would be, and where one thing will happen, the carriage from the Jaffa,
So the old city, I mean, is the old.
yes,
city
but
there?
the physical dimensions of the city were going to change, and he was extrapolating from the biblical text to see where things would be. If you are into that specifically, when we're done, open the book that I have propped up there towards the back, and you'll see it where I have a better explanation. The people like the Spaffords, the people that moved to Palestine in preparation for Christ's return, they, to be sure, they were not considered nutcases. They were simply the activists putting into action the prevailing view. Evangelists implored Jewish organizations, such as the British Board of Deputies, to corral their people and ship them to Palestine. In the purely imperial side of the equation, Britain and the US looked to a Jewish presence in Palestine as a practical tool in conquering the land. But what a surprise, Jews were not interested in going to a foreign land on behalf of messianic and imperial interests. with the libel that when Christ shows up, they will be forced to convert or be swallowed whole by the gates of hell. Now, to be sure, many Jews did go to Palestine during this period for their own, whatever, personal, cultural, religious reasons, but they were not proto-Zionists. Meanwhile, the evangelical madness fueled a widening break in reality in what this biblical Palestine could have been, which in my view is an important point because it would later feed Zionist images of ancient Palestine as a vast, grand Hebrew kingdom, reinforcing the fanaticism. To illustrate my point, let's look at the images of Solomon's temple, that is the apocryphal first temple, on two maps. This image is from a mid-16th century Italian engraving, and it's roughly typical of conceptions going back centuries. Now, obviously, it's completely imaginary. We don't know if this place ever existed. But the view is entirely reasonable. It's an entirely plausible guess of what Solomon's temple might have looked like if it existed. By the early 19th century, this view was the most prominent, here taken from a Christian educational map of Palestine published in Philadelphia in 1823. This reflects true fanaticism, a complete disconnect from reality. The evangelical obsession with quote unquote the Jews returning continued through the century, and then we reach 1896. Theodor Herzl, who had been a staunch assimilationist, is so shaken by the Dreyfus affair that he gives up on the hope of Jewish emancipation and proposes the Jewish colonization of Palestine in his famous book, The Jewish State. Anti-Jewish racism had finally provoked the very return that the Christians sought. And it would have seemed that all Herzl had to do was to assure the success of his project was to tell the Messianic Christians, okay, here we are, we're the Jews, let's get to work. But no, Herzl's book is in retrospect very odd. It's a secular practical manual for settlement building, and the word Israel appears once in a completely benign context to do with religious instruction. The following year, 1897, Herzl conducts the first Zionist Congress and initiates a weekly paper devoted exclusively to the Zionist cause, Die Welt, the world. That ran until the outbreak of World War I. The image that greeted readers of Die Welt was a small map of the Eastern Mediterranean encased in a Star of David. The map was given front stage prominence situated at the top between the title's two words. This simple map is, to my mind, among the most interesting and revealing in the entire history of modern Palestine. The extraordinary aspect of this map is that it is utterly, utterly unremarkable. It's a straightforward map of the Eastern Mediterranean. Starting from the upper left, we see Greece, below it the island of Crete. To the right, we see Klein Asia, that is Turkey, and below that Cyprus. The Levant bears the single label Palestina, with Jerusalem marked. A simple line indicates the Jordan River. Above it, the dot with a D is Damascus. On the bottom, we see the Red Sea segmented into the Gulfs of Suez and Aqaba, and on the lower left, the Nile Delta. From today's mindset, looking back 128 years, it seems inexplicable that this could be the cartographic view that the very father of the Zionist movement chose to introduce and advertise his scheme. It bears no trace of the mysticism or biblical hocus pocus that are the bedrock of Zionism today. Herzl did understand that he needed the mystique of Palestine to lure settlers, but he failed to grasp that it could not be sold in that packaging. Zionism would likely have died with Herzl due to his bungled marketing, had Messianic Christianity not just spent the previous 4 centuries solving the marketing problem. Herzl branded his project Palestine. Those who followed in his footsteps rebranded it Israel with all the religious, cultural, metaphysical mystique the word carried. It was just as Herzl died in 1904 that we see his marketing errors identified and rectified. In his preface to the 1904 edition of The Jewish State, the Zionist activist Jacob de Haas speaks openly about Herzl's failure to understand how to sell his project. Herzl, he says, made the mistake of basing his state on the needs of the oppressed and placed it in Palestine, a word, quote, sufficient to condemn it in the eyes of most Western Jews. To fix this, Zionism was now to be based not on the oppressed, but instead on, quote, a bundle of emotions wrapped in the praying shawl of the Jew, and these, when spread out, make up a flag which can only float in the breezes of Zion. These words were printed when Herzl had just died, and his offending map was soon replaced. And so those who carried the torch after Herzl repurposed his 1896 product in 2 millennia old messianic packaging.
Hello.
By the end of World War I, Zionism had reinvented itself. Christian millennialists were ready customers, and in the US Congress, speeches were made praising Zionism as proof that indeed the time of the prophecies had arrived. Zionism, meanwhile, became fascistical, enlisting Jews into the project by force if coercion and brainwashing fail. Already by 1924, the Haganah, which would become the IDF, was assassinating Jews for opposing the project. And in the aftermath of World War II, the emotional and psychological vulnerability of those who had just survived the unthinkable was exploited by the Zionists to solidify their cult. Palestine was in turmoil from Zionist terror, and the British, who had occupied the land since 1917, wanted out. It was widely assumed that the partitioning of the land would be the proposed fix, but both the Palestinians and above all the Zionists were fanatically opposed to this. The Palestinians, correctly, saw partition as a prelude to their banishment from their own land. Meanwhile, the Zionists claimed the entire land was theirs by divine right. In this 1946 cartoon from a London Zionist newspaper called The Jewish Struggle, British Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin on the left and Prime Minister Clement Attlee on the right use scissors in allegorical partitioning of their map of Palestine, which the cartoon says will result in the extermination of the Jews. And of course, this is after the liberation of the camps, after the defeat of the Nazis. Now, note that the Jordan River is and the Dead Sea here. The partition that they are railing against is thick, with Attlee about to use this to cut it. So in other words, even this partition that the Zionists railed against as heralding the death of all Jews gave the Zionists all of Palestine and half of Jordan. The following year, 1947, we come to the United Nations partition map itself. I'm going to point out one thing, which my reason for pointing it out will be clear later. Jaffa. You probably cannot see there is an orange speck there. Behind the orange speck is Jaffa. In other words, Jaffa has been detached from the other parts of the Palestinian side of the partition. Now, analyzing maps often means putting oneself in the imaginary mind of the map to understand your subject on its terms, the world through its eyes. And so I thought that the partition map, this most fraught of maps, should be allowed to speak for itself. Now here, I designed a way to explain the partition map for a general audience, a way that I thought would would not bore them and that they would remember. I need your feedback as to whether this works. What I did was I imagined a conversation with the map, who I will call 181 after the UN General Assembly resolution that created him, not just for a bit of levity, but as an effective means of conveying what in fact happened. So I sought out 181 in retirement. I find him in an obscure old London loft and timidly knock on his door. He opens it a crack. Excuse me, 181. I'm going to give a talk about the mapping of Palestine, and obviously you're cited in it, so naturally I wanted to speak to you. So 181 looks at me suspiciously, never having been asked to do an interview in all these years of retirement. So I tell him, look, there's a great pub around the corner, and the beer's on me. 181 agrees. And lest any of you doubt me, here is proof. We find a quiet table in the pub and order 2 IPAs. So you're going to talk about me? Yes, and it's best I just get to the point. 78 years ago, you had one job, just one job, and you bungled it. No point my mincing words. You were a complete failure. 181 looks at me like I was crazy. What on earth are you talking about? I was brilliant. I was a virtuoso. Mission performed flawlessly and, by the way, ahead of schedule. So I reply, I don't know how you can say that. You were supposed to create 2 states and a central international zone after the British departure in mid-May 48. You did nothing. Already by mid-January, any possibility of your 2 states or any 2 states was dead. Hold on, 181 replies, looking exasperated. Have you never met a map before? Am I really the first map you ever met? Our alleged role, such as you might believe from our title, well, it's often just a diversion to help us achieve our actual mission, which could even be the opposite. So don't bore me with this 2-state nonsense. The UN hired me to get it and Britain out of a bind. You have to remember, it was the mid-1940s, and the Zionists are blowing up Palestine all over the place, assassinating anyone they don't like, and tens of thousands of British soldiers who had just defeated the Nazis couldn't control it. So they come to me and they pour their hearts out. They say that unless they find a way to give all of Palestine to the Zionists, it will blow up in their faces. And, you know, they meant that literally, because Zionist terror had already spread to Europe and Britain. But the UN couldn't just hand it over to them. That would look terrible. Remember, the UN was new and had to prove itself. So they asked me, can you get the Zionists off our backs while we look like we did our job fairly? Do you think you can pull it off? I assured them I was the right map for the gig. Now, here was my challenge. All along the terror gangs, Lehi and the Irgun, they were ideological. They demanded the whole thing up front, you know, the whole God gave it to them thing. But the Jewish agency, Ben-Gurion, Weizmann, that whole bunch, they used the same line, of course, but they were pragmatic, clever. They knew that the key to the whole land was Zionist sovereignty on any part of it. Then they just take the rest. That had always been the plan. And how to do that? Me. Partition as a means to no partition. But the UN was nervous still. They come back to me and they ask, where are you going to draw this line? We don't want to look like fools when it doesn't happen. So I say, relax. I'm a professional. I've already thought of that. I'm going to map the line to give the Zionists so much more land than makes any sense that it'll take them longer to get past it. And as a bonus, the ridiculous line will make extra sure that the Palestinians would be insane to agree to it. So whatever happens, you can blame them. 181 takes a long gulp of beer and then turns to me with an ominous grin. If you don't mind my bragging a bit, tell me this. If you had to select just one Palestinian locale, one city that encapsulated Arab Palestinian identity, what would it be? Now think, an iconic city, an ancient city of arts, culture, publishing, education, commerce, agriculture, everything that you would want to erase if you wanted to erase Palestine itself. So I thought about this just for a moment, and I said, I told 181, I suppose that would be Jaffa? Exactly, 181 exclaimed. So I disappeared it. Yes, I disappeared Jaffa. I made Jaffa a tiny speck, lost in the Zionist side, not connected to the Palestinian side. Admitted this was genius. My ink was barely dry, and poof, Jaffa is gone. And the public doesn't even notice. I was so good. I was so good that I've duped even a lot of you pro-Pal people who leave Jaffa out when you show pictures of me. At this point, with the pub trying to close, I ask one final question. Tell me, 181, any regrets, anything that did not work out as planned? Well, there is one thing. They never expected the Palestinians to hang on. They thought they'd all just go away and forget, but that's not my fault. As we parted ways, 181 turns to me and says, when you talk about me, don't judge me. I'm a map. I'm a reflection of you. Two more stillborn maps followed in 181's wake. First, in September 1948, Folke Bernadotte, the UN mediator, whom the UN thought the Zionists would respect because he had saved the lives of thousands of Jews from the Nazi death camps, proposed a new map, or he was about to propose a new map when he was murdered by Lehi assassins working for the Israeli state under Ben-Gurion. The new map had three deadly sins. It mandated fixed borders, it retained Jerusalem and Bethlehem as international zones, and most of all, the map required that the people of the land be on the map. No ethnic cleansing, non-Jews would return to their own homes. Then at the end of 1948, a ceasefire line was mapped to stop the fighting, and which became the basis of the armistice. The armistice made explicit what the map was not. It was not new de facto borders. Yet Israel refused even to retreat fully to the armistice line, and this ceasefire line, plus the extra it took, eventually morphed into the so-called 1967 borders. And so here we are today, genocide so normalized that the mass media are bored even of their sanitized misreporting of it, and we seem to be losing the battle to end it despite the worldwide revulsion. Earlier, I made the obvious point that the Israeli state would instantly cease to exist if it stopped keeping the land's people in internment camps. Now, this is a pretty damning observation, and no degree of Israeli repackaging can refute it. But in the alternate universe of the cult compounds in which we live, ethnogeographic magic addresses this otherwise fatal glitch. I'd like to repeat common examples to demonstrate why I believe the general inertia of the movement for Palestinian liberation is unknowingly trapped in this ethnogeographic manipulation, fighting for Palestine while safely locked in Israel's alternate universe. Palestine is a made-up human, Palestinian is a made-up human, and Palestine a made-up country. Unless there be any doubt, even the Arabs confirmed this. I can prove it. In the early 18th century, a Dutch Protestant Orientalist scholar by the name of Adrian Rayland reviewed all the ancient sources about Palestine that he could get his hands on, and in 1714 published the result in a book with several maps, such as this one showing distances in Roman miles based on ancient sources. Read the book. It's documented proof. You'll find this, by the way, referred to frequently in the Jewish Chronicle, the Jerusalem Post. They'll cite this book to prove this. Now, I'm sorry?
Yeah.
The title is in Dutch, but the author is Adrian Rayland, Reland, 1714. And by the way, he was apparently quite a guy. His book was fabulous for what he set out to do and the sources available to him. And he was very much into looking at all religions in a in a more even light, and he was particularly fond of Islam. So it's especially ironic that his work is twisted for this. But back to our point, how do we, the people in the pro-Palestine movement who read this stuff, how do they respond? They respond to this. Well, Rayland never really said that, or his sources were unrepresentative or flawed, and we point out that he never went to Palestine. Next. 2,000 years ago, the Romans renamed the entire region Palestine in order to erase its Jewish roots. Therefore, people labeled Palestinian are mythical. How do we respond? Well, actually, the name Palestine predates the Romans. I mean, Herodotus uses the name, though this doesn't even really contradict the claim, but that's what we say. Next, everyone knows that there was never a country of Palestine, that it was nothing but a series of occupations after the great Hebrew kingdoms. We argue back that, well, country is a slippery word in English and other European languages, that today it's used to mean nation state, but nothing was a country in that sense 2,000 years ago. Palestinian nationalism is artificial. The PLO made it up to try to claim the land. Well, we counter nationalism as the natural response of people fighting for their land. We make up our own bizarre arguments. We point out that Palestinians are Semites, and therefore, I admit I've never quite understood this, therefore, since Palestinians are Semites, therefore it's anti-Semitic to repress them, something like that. Or to me, the most telling one of all, and the most common one of all, how many times do we look at social media and someone has found a map from whatever, 1850, and it's labeled Palestine? Aha, proof that the Palestinians exist. And on. All this proves nothing except that we too are trapped in this matrix of ethno-geographic insanity. We too accept the basic premise that juggling selected ethnographic and ethnogeographic and geographic labels can grant or deny personhood. No, if I were to follow you home and inform you that a particular name for the piece of land on which you live has a fraught history in ancient times, or that a particular ethnic label for you and a particular label for the a geographic label for the land you're on don't match, therefore I'm going to throw you out and take over your home, you would not start parsing my definitions. You would never cross your mind to engage with my definitions. You would call me certifiably insane and call the police. The whole thing has to be thrown out. The right of people to be in their own homes, on their own land, as equals, is not to be carved out around the mental illness of Zionism. But unfortunately, I believe a lot of the general movement for Palestinian liberation is falling for this. To illustrate the ghastly degree to which we have degraded ourselves locked in this cult compound, I'll finish with a map that fell from the heavens onto Gaza in 2009. Multiple copies of this map were airdropped by the Israeli Air Force, ordering the people of Gaza never to approach within 1,000 feet of the Israeli barrier. So, what happens if the people locked up in Gaza disobey the map that fell from the heavens? In 2018, as all of you know, they disobeyed. Many staged a purely symbolic march of return into the forbidden area, which happens to be Gaza's most fertile farmland, in an attempt to bring their 70 years of desperation to the world's attention. Israeli snipers shot dead 200, including medical workers rushing to help the injured, and crippled hundreds more, while continuing to enforce the same sadism on Gaza's most fertile fishing grounds. But Israeli violence is self-vindicating. The more the state's violence, the more proof it is defending itself. As always, it successfully spun the atrocity to the receptive West as the thwarting of a Palestinian attack. The Palestinians are dying because of our disease. They cannot cure us. We need to analyze how we can cure us. Step one is to identify the disease. All the usual explanations for this disease are simply manifestations of something larger, and that it is that actual cause that must be identified and defeated. I have tried to explain my view that this something larger is the chain reaction resulting from the fusion of Christian messianic apocalyptic theology with its love child, a racial supremacist fascistical movement that answered its darkest fantasies. And I've tried to demonstrate that its major power source is the manipulation of ethnogeographic thought on our cultural hardwiring, sparking its message past critical thought, mainlining it to our psyche. Liberating us from this, in my view, is necessary to liberate the world from the scourge of this genocidal bully club known as the Israeli state and those empowering it. Thank you. This is self-explanatory. I thought it was a good backdrop in case anyone has comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. It's such an honor to have you here. I wonder if there's anyone who would like to have a conversation with Tom. I have to go back and see if there's anybody online. We have about 40 people on a Zoom and 20 on a YouTube. Let me. Nancy.
Well, so that was a real tour de force. Just finding all these sources was quite spectacular. How did you go about doing it? What was your first kernel of an idea that you then pursued?
I've been involved with maps for 50 years. So the whole idea of the subliminal effect of maps on people, it was nothing new to me. This I've seen a lot over the years. And I also, for years with Palestine, I have fixated on this idea of Israel, that this word that appears, it first appears in Genesis. Am I correct in saying that? It's in Genesis, and you get the idea reading the Bible, which I did many years ago, that this place was created by God is a feeling, because it's all to do with the origin of everything, and that the way this has been manipulated by the Israeli state to it always seemed obvious to me that much of the Israeli state's ability to withstand any criticism was the fact that you could not say anything against this word Israel. The word itself, you couldn't say any, you couldn't try to say that this thing called Israel has committed a crime because of the nature of the place name. And after October 7th, when we were all trying to find some way to make sense of what was going on, I just started to think much more deeply about that. And what I need to know from all of you here is if you think that what I've said makes sense. I'm not claiming it's the answer, but the question is it part of the answer?
Who would like to reply?
Makes sense. It makes sense. Religion is at the bottom of this thing, I think. If you believe in the Bible, well, everything.
You think that religion is at the root of this, really?
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
This is part of the whole thing. But in addition to that, I think that part of the big problem that we're facing is that the United States was created by occupying the land of other people. How can we then say to anybody, you don't have the right to go and take people's land?
Ben-Gurion was fond of using this tool, of using the whole settler thing, because I know when I grew up in school, the colonists were the good guys. And Ben-Gurion was fond of making that comparison.
Other thoughts? You know, I'd just like to add one thing. I did a thesis on the French Revolution and why it did not sweep across England as it had elsewhere. And one of the big sub-themes was the role of the Protestants.
I see.
And the Church Missionary Society was formed after the Church of Rome was dethroned by France. And they really did think now is the time. Look, the Church of Rome, which they called Antichrist, has been overthrown. So now we can start converting people. And this is the time that last days will be manifest to the whole world. I mean, you could see that in 1790s. So right there, I mean, they were very unsuccessful in converting people, but this whole mentality that, it's the biblical time because we've gotten rid of the Antichrist. And not so much talking about the restoration of the Jews. I think that came a little later, that at least in England, that was made a real connection.
It came and went. It wasn't an even progression. It was very strong in the middle 1600s, then it waned a bit, and then it picked up dramatically after the French Revolution.
I would like to ask, just make a comment. I was born in Jaffa, Palestine, and I was so, for the first time, I realized why Jaffa was attacked first. Thank you for pointing this out. My parents lived there, and Jaffa was the center of culture and progress. And then the Jaffans were kicked out first.
Yes.
Now that I learned from you, it's important that I know that part of the history.
It was a really cynical crime, the way they handled Jaffa.
Yes, absolutely. So what is the solution? You said something like after October 7th, things change. How did they change after October 7th?
After October 7th, the world put us, the movement for Palestinian justice, put us on the defensive. We were supposed to be afraid to discuss October 7th. We were supposed to be embarrassed by October 7th, when we should have done exactly the opposite, in my view. We should have said, let's talk about October 7th. Yes, we're going to talk about it, what happened and why it happened.
Yes.
But because of all the control over the government, over the discourse of and the use of terrorism, and all the way people's lives can be shattered if they are accused of this, we backed away from it. But the initial response to October 7th was, of course, that we were somehow, everything had been lost, because now we were supporting this supposed terrorist group. But I think that we have to do exactly the opposite.
Yeah, I think that, when people say that October 7 was terrible, yes, attacking civilians was a terrible thing. But then if you only stop there, you get a D for your analysis. If you were a history professor, I would give you, if I were a history professor, I would give a person saying that a D, because you did not really know why did they attack? Why?
Yeah.
Why did Hamas attack? Because they've been under siege for so long, because they can't move, they can't trade, they can't send their children to study, they can't have food. It's just like America, depending upon Russia to give America how much food they can eat every day, whether they can move or not. We did not make that analogy, and that's, to me, we did not explain, just like what you're saying. We should have done more.
Yes, yeah. It was so successful that It is probably rare to find an uninvolved member of the public who does not assume that the Hamas attack was based on anti-Semitism. This is just assumed.
Yes, and they don't understand. Americans don't know that Palestinians are Semites. They don't understand that.
I would like to go back to the TO maps, which seem really interesting, and the fact that it's east-west, that east is on top. Is that correct?
Yes.
East is on top and west below. And to give a variation to your theory that it's all about religion, I would say that the TO maps come out of a worldview rather than a specifically religious view. That is, the church was in charge of everything, and it was an all-pervasive Western European construct, and it was a worldview that placed the origin of the world at the T crossing, and not specifically a religious issue. But I'd like to.
Yeah, to be sure, the origins of the TO map are pre-Christian. They're ancient, but the other thing is the idea that we expect north to be at the top. We sort of inherited that from Ptolemaic geography in the 300-400 years ago when it became more and more normal. But there's no reason for that to be normal. It's a convention. And going back then, all different things were at the top of the map. But where it was coincidental is in the following respect. Some of the elaborate mappamundi that are on a TO skeleton, east at the top worked out perfectly because the Garden of Eden was, of course, presumed to be in the east, and then if they showed the Garden of Eden, it was therefore then at the top of the world graphically. But again, that's simply another coincidence with the TO pattern. That and the centrality of Palestine coincidences.
Oh, yes.
Hi, I'm Nicola. Thank you so much. I loved how the person in the front mentioned parallels to the United States as a settler colony as well. And I struggle with this often because, yeah, I think to support Palestinian self-determination and independence, we too would need to support restoration of indigenous governance here, which we haven't really done. And I'm just curious what you think the parallels are with other settler colonies like the US. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. Sorry.
I guess I'm just curious how you find the understanding of settler colonialism in Israel to relate or be different to how it manifests in the US and Canada here.
I don't have any expertise on the subject of settler colonialism, and in a way, I don't think it's relevant to the process of bringing the Israeli state to an end. However that functions. I think it's a very good question, but it's not something that I have any expertise in.
I want to put in a plug for these beautiful books. This is the one Tom has been talking about tonight. It's called Palestine Mapped, and it's just a lovely rendition of all these old maps and explanations. It's just, I want a copy myself for this church.
I
really
should
beautiful.
explain that the shipment of those books, which were printed in the Far East, were commandeered by customs 3 weeks ago, and that's all that we know. But if someone wants a copy of it, there is a sheet of paper that the publisher gave me, where if you put in your name and your shipping address and your email address, they'll send you by email a thing to pay for it. when the book is available, and they won't charge you for shipping.
We also have a book called Writings on the Wall, Palestinian Oral Histories. And one other that's back in the back. Is that the new one that's
The one that's piled up
Yes.
is Palestine Hijacked, which is quite different from this. Those two books there, if anybody wants it, there's a QR code that, as I understand it, I've never done this, as I understand it, you do the QR code and it brings you to a Venmo thing of the publisher and you just pay for it there.
QR codes? Okay. Thank you. This has been really lovely.
Thank you very
I
much.
just really appreciate your presence here.
The way I made a joke out of the partition map, does that work or? Okay.
I think your point about Jaffa is a really enlightening, and it cleared up something for me, because I've of course read that Jaffa was on the Palestinian side of the partition, but I never could see it on a map, so it was very confusing. And even I read the book City of Oranges, which is about Jaffa, but I don't remember it making that point clearly either. So that was quite enlightening. I guess I have to confess, I'm not quite sure how to take this fascinating stuff that you shared with us and make it politically effective. So I think more thought maybe needs to be, well, I'd be interested in what you think, but more thought about how to, and I mean, the other thing, of course, the right of return should be respected, and of course, every person living on that land should have their whole personhood. But it's unclear how we get from here to there, even though I think the vast majority of people in the world at this point are on the side of the Palestinians.
Go to the Salman Abu Sit, the Palestine Land Society. He's way ahead of us. He's already there. He's already planning out how this will work. A Palestine Land Society, Salman Abu Sit. This is his life project, to working out. He's not waiting for us to fix this. He's already figuring out how to do it.
I also would like to note that on our Zoom we are joined by Linda Dittmar, who is the author of this wonderful book. It's called Tracing Homelands: Israel, Palestine, and the Claims of Belonging. Linda spoke here about a year and a half ago when the book came out, and she is with us tonight, and I want to congratulate her again for this beautiful book. We have a few copies here for sale if you're interested. And it is also on Interlink Publishing Group. Michelle Mushabek, who is really a remarkable publisher in Western Massachusetts, who publishes a lot on the subject of Palestine. Is there anyone else online? I have to run back. I don't have a Zoomster. I'm my own Zoomster tonight. Who would like to say hello? Or yes, we have Pat Westwater Jung. Pat?
I would like to say hello.
Go ahead, Pat. You need to unmute. There we go.
I just want to say, do you think England?
Wait a second. It's Pat's turn.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said go ahead for me.
Was that Linda?
Yeah,
Let's start with Pat, and then we'll have Linda. Okay?
Absolutely.
No, actually, I prefer Linda to go first.
Linda, the floor is yours.
Well, it was a brilliant talk. I have 3 old maps of Palestine in my corridor that I found in one place or another. And I always joke about them that is the colonial wing of my house, like in a museum that you have a colonial wing. but the talk was wonderful. Following those maps was really quite incredible. I've always been interested in maps, and you do a brilliant, really brilliant job with that. I agree that the part about Jaffa was particularly new to me. I remember that Jaffa was conquered by the Haganah and actually by the IZL Etzel before 48, even early on. And I saw the destruction of it at the time. This is really important to know, and really particularly important for Americans to know about all of that. Clearly, Israel is a partner in all that discussion, and early Zionism is part of that discussion too. But I think that the United States has to take, and the West have to take a tremendous responsibility for what's going on. But thank you for a brilliant talk. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Linda. And Pat, go ahead.
Okay, I thought it was a brilliant talk also. Um, but there were so many pieces of it that I need to think it through. He talked about the archaeologists, and I once was in Jerusalem meeting with an Israeli Jewish archaeologist who was, I forget the name of their group, but he was talking about how they are using archaeology in a way to falsify Jewish history in some ways. So a little bit off subject. So I'm going to listen to this again. I thank you very much for all your ideas. It will help me put together a slightly different picture of why this all happened. So I really appreciate this, and we'll listen to this again. On us taking this in a different direction, you mentioned Epstein, just his name. And I'm wondering if this is a time or place where you would like to elaborate on why you mentioned him and how that fits into the current situation. And if not, I would understand, of course.
I know nothing more than what we've all read in the newspapers, but there seems to be a high likelihood that Epstein was involved with the Mossad, and that a lot of the, shall we say, compromising information is being used as extortion to keep US politicians under control. There's no proof of that, but I mentioned that as among the reasons that are cited. This, of course, would have only come into play in the 1990s. Is that right? This would not affect the earlier history, but it certainly is plausible that it is one element today in cases of certain U.S. politicians.
Okay. One last thing, Pat reminded us that you can watch this again on our YouTube channel. And you can see there are lots of other things like respect to this same topic. Speakers like Linda Dittmar, like Max Blumenthal, like Miko Peled, all sorts of wonderful talks on there. We now have 85,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, and it's a remarkable thing. I haven't checked to see how many were there tonight, but it's really a great thing. Tom is on the end of a book tour, and we congratulate you for this wonderful talk and this beautiful book. And as soon as it's available in this country, we hope to get a copy of it and have you back to sign it for us. The sooner the better.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
I didn't get a chance to ask my question.
Thanks. Okay.
Okay, can I ask my question now?
One last question. Go ahead.
Okay.
Who is this, by the way? Tell us.
My name is Siham Alfred, and I'm online on Zoom from Virginia. And my question is, what don't you think that the British have to be penalized and have to pay for the Palestinians for what they have done to the Palestinians by allowing the Jews to come and initiate a state there?
Of course. To elaborate a bit, when the day comes when the river to the sea is one area in which all people are equal. Now, the stipulation will be that all people who want to remain must agree that they are going to be equal citizens. Now, when that happens, anybody who is there now who chooses not to remain because they do not agree to be an equal citizen, then the country is responsible for the disaster, principally, not only, but principally Britain and the United States. They must then give these people citizenship. And the entire West and the complicit Arab countries must pay massive reparations. Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Once more for Tom Suarez, yeah.
Thank you.
We bid you good night, and we hope you will join us tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. for Aviva Chomsky and other Sundays coming up for wonderful programs. Sign up on our mailing list. We'd be glad to be in touch with you about everything coming up here at the Community Church of Boston. Meeting at the building is over.